Ideas for legislation come from citizens, interest groups, and problems that are receiving attention in the media. Legislative staff play a critical role in turning those ideas into the proper format for bills, which can then be introduced into the legislative process. Leaders and members in both chambers are helped by full-time staff. There are full-time paid staff that support the majority and minority party leadership. These include press secretaries or director of communication who handle media outreach. Some of the full-time staff are expert policy analysts who help research issues and work with leadership to design legislative solutions. The Arizona Legislative Council serves both the House and Senate. Its staff helps elected legislators to research their ideas and to turn those ideas into actual bills that are submitted at the start of each session.
Legislative staff play a very important role in the drafting of legislation. All bills are drafted by Legislative Council. They're a nonpartisan staff that are there to make sure the legislation is in proper form, the style and terminology are all correct, and that the legislation is in proper form.
So staff plays a critical role in not only the drafting of legislation, but the shepherding of legislation through the legislative process. These members are incredibly busy every day. They're going to committees, they're going to the floor, they are meeting with constituents, they're meeting with lobbyists and staff, and frankly, they don't have time to read every piece of legislation that they're voting on, either in committee or on the floor. Staff plays the critical function of being the policy experts in any given area and helping the member to understand what it is that they're voting on, what the pros and cons are, what the various stakeholders and interest groups are saying about the legislation, and helping the member understand where and how all these factors come together so that the member can make an educated and informed decision when it comes time to cast a vote on that particular bill.
And each state legislator has full-time staff to support their work, especially with constituents. Even with all this help, our state legislators are extremely busy during their 100-day legislative sessions. Each year, over 1,000 bills are introduced to the State House and Senate. Each bill is referred to a committee. It is the job of committees to decide whether a bill should be moved forward. Committees are specialized by policy area. So, for example, a bill about education would be referred to the House or Senate Education Committee.
Yes, some committees are significantly more influential than others. There's no doubt about that. You have the Rules Committee, which is sort of at the top tier. If you put committees in tiers, they would be the top one because no bill makes it through the process unless they are able to get through the Rules Committee. Now, the Rules Committee oftentimes consists of leadership from both sides. And in the Senate, for the last 8 years, the president of the Senate has actually chaired the Rules Committee. No pretense, that's the gate. And you've got to clear the gate for that bill to go forward in any fashion whatsoever. So that would be tier one. Tier two, I would say, are what we sometimes call the money committees. And in the House, it would be Ways and Means and Appropriations, and in the Senate, Finance and Appropriations, because these are the committees that set tax policy on one hand, and they spend the government's money on the other. And that's a very important function because those committees lead to legislation which use the police power to take property from the citizens. So that's an important thing. Secondly, the appropriations committees then decide how to spend the money that you have taken from the people. And that's important too, because how the government spends its money tells you what the priorities really are of the government. Then you've got another tier, in my view, of perhaps committees that are more important. They might include judiciary and education and health. And those committees are important more so than others perhaps because of the subject matter they deal with. The Judiciary Committee, for example, they deal with the criminal code, and that can ultimately impact the liberty of our citizens, and that's an important thing. Education, perhaps some would say certainly by the volume of work, the most bills go to the Education Committee, and it's very important to our citizens. We spend half of the state budget on education, so it's obviously a big, big deal. And then it might be health. Others might say, no, it's commerce or government. But there are clearly pecking orders as far as the significance of committees, and at least in my mind, that might be where I would put them.
As an educator, some of the committees that I think are really important in the legislative process are the budget committee, right? The folks who sit down and figure out what the state budget is going to be and where they're going to allocate those funds every year, because those are the folks who decide what the priorities of Arizona are. Being able to sit in on those budget hearings and understand where legislators stand on where public money is going to go, what programs they're willing to support, what programs they want to cut, that's a really important one. And as an educator, I really think that the education committee is really important because 1 million students attend public education in the state of Arizona. In my district alone, that's over 60,000 students. So the work that that committee does affects future generations of Arizonans. It affects the future economy of Arizona. And I really think that the work that they do every year is an important thing to keep an eye on and an important thing to make sure that we have people involved in, because they have an impact on such a great number of Arizonans, right? The education is a huge part of the state budget. It's the largest piece of the Arizona budget. And so what those folks do inside that education committee and the decisions they make affect a giant part of the budget, and it affects a giant part of what the state government in Arizona does.
Legislative committees take their work very seriously, and they are very selective about what should be moved forward for a full vote on the floor of their chamber. On average, only a small percentage of bills actually become a law. We'll look at the details of how a bill becomes a law in the next video.